Joseph, son of Jacob, 17 years old and utterly unaware, is walking north from the valley of Hebron with a coat on his back that will very shortly be soaked in the blood of a goat and carried home to his father as evidence of a death that never happened. He does not know this. He is walking through open country in the late morning, the sun climbing, the road unrolling ahead of him toward Shechem, where his brothers are supposed to be pasturing the flocks. And he is carrying nothing but a message from his father, and a few provisions, and the innocent confidence of a boy who has been told his whole life that he is loved. He is not walking toward his brothers. He is walking toward a pit, and then a caravan, and then a slave market, and then a house in a foreign city, and then a prison cell, and then, 13 years later, after every single thing he owns, and every relationship he has, and every expectation he holds has been stripped away from him piece by piece, toward a throne. He is walking toward the salvation of the entire ancient world, and he has absolutely no idea. That is where we begin. Not with the throne, not with the palace or the signet ring, or the chariot rolling through the streets of Egypt while men cry out before it. We begin with a 17-year-old boy on a road, carrying his father's love on his shoulders in the form of a coat, walking cheerfully and obliviously into the worst 13 years of his life. Because here is the question that this study exists to answer, and I want to name it plainly right at the start so you know exactly what we are doing together for the next several hours. The question is not whether God has a plan. Most of us can say that. Most of us have said it out loud to someone else, in a hospital corridor or a kitchen at midnight or a parking lot after a phone call that changed everything. God has a plan. We say it. We mean it. And then we go home and lie in the dark and wonder whether we actually believe a single word of it. The question is this: what does God's plan look like from the inside of it while it is happening to you, when it does not look like a plan at all? When it looks like betrayal, when it looks like injustice, when it looks like being forgotten by everyone who promised to remember you, when it looks like years piling up on years with no explanation and no reprieve, and no evidence that anyone in heaven has noticed you are still down here waiting. That is Joseph's story. And that is why Joseph's story has never stopped mattering. Because Joseph is not given a vision at the bottom of the pit. There is no angel in the pit. There is no voice from heaven in the pit. Read the text. Read it slowly, read it carefully, read it as though you had never heard it before, and you will notice something that most retellings quietly skip past. God never speaks to Joseph. Not once. Not in the whole narrative. Abraham heard God speak. Isaac heard God speak. Jacob wrestled with God in the dark at the ford of Jabbok and walked away limping and renamed. But Joseph, the one who suffers the longest and the most unjustly and with the least explanation of any of them, Joseph gets silence. 13 years of silence. 2 dreams at the age of 17, and then nothing, from the pit to the caravan, to Potiphar's house, to the prison, to the palace. Nothing. And yet the narrator will not stop telling us something. Over and over, at the exact moments when the story is at its darkest, a single phrase surfaces in the text like a hand breaking the surface of water. The Lord was with Joseph. In the house of the Egyptian, when he is property and not a person, the Lord was with Joseph. In the prison, when he has been falsely accused and thrown into the king's dungeon, and there is no lawyer and no appeal and no hope, the Lord was with Joseph. Joseph does not hear it. Joseph is never told it. The reader is told it. You are told it. And that gap, the gap between what Joseph experiences and what the narrator knows, is the entire spiritual architecture of this story, and it is the reason you are here. Because you are living inside that gap right now, every one of you. That is the human condition. You are inside a story whose narration you cannot hear. So over the next several hours, we are going to walk the whole road with him, all of it. We are not going to skip the ugly parts and land on the famous line at the end. We are not going to hand you a tidy summary and send you on your way with 3 principles for enduring hardship. We are going to sit in the pit. We are going to feel the ropes. We are going to walk to Egypt behind a caravan of Ishmaelite traders with our hands bound. We are going to stand in Potiphar's house and watch a young man build something good out of nothing and then watch it get destroyed by a lie he could not disprove. We are going to sit in a prison cell for years, counting the days, watching hope arrive, and then walk out the door and forget our name. And then we are going to stand in the throne room, and we are going to hear the words that everything in this story has been building toward, the words that reframe not just Joseph's suffering but yours. Ye thought evil against me, but God meant it unto good. Because that sentence is not a platitude. That sentence cost 13 years. And a man who has paid 13 years for a sentence has earned the right to say it to you. Before we go one step further into this, I want to ask you for one thing and one thing only. Just this. Leave a like on this video, that is all. It is free, it takes a single tap, and it will take you less time than it took me to say this sentence. And here is why I'm asking. Not because of an algorithm, not because a number matters to me. Somewhere out there tonight, there's a person who has been carrying something for years that no one knows about. Someone who has been in Potiphar's house, or in the cell, or on the road to Shechem with a coat on their back, and no idea what is coming. And whether these words ever reach them depends almost entirely on whether people like you tap that button. Your like is what carries this to a stranger you will never meet, in a country you may never visit, at the exact hour they need it. It is a small, quiet gift to someone whose name you will never learn. So if you would, tap the thumbs up just below this video. That is all it takes. And then, if you would, one more small thing. Leave a comment with a single word, just one. The word for what you are carrying into this teaching tonight. The weight you are hoping to set down before this is over. Not an explanation, not a paragraph, not a performance. One word. You will find, I think, that reading everyone else's single word does something to you. Now, let us go back to Hebron and let us start at the beginning, because to understand what happened to Joseph on that road, you first have to understand the family he came from. The Bible does not begin Joseph's story with Joseph. It begins it with a sentence about his father, and the sentence is doing more work than it appears to be doing. These are the generations of Jacob. Joseph, being 17 years old, was feeding the flock with his brethren. Jacob, the supplanter, the man whose entire life had been an education in what deception does to a family, taught to him by a curriculum he himself designed. He had deceived his own father, put goatskins on his arms, and stood in front of a blind old man and lied about who he was in order to steal a blessing. He had been deceived by his father-in-law Laban, who swapped one daughter for another under cover of darkness and handed him a marriage he had not chosen and 7 more years of labor he had not agreed to. He had deceived Laban in return with the speckled and spotted flocks. Deception was the water this family swam in. It was the family language. And now, at the beginning of Genesis 37, that language is about to be spoken back to Jacob one last time, with a goat and a garment, the exact instruments he had used on Isaac, and it is going to cost him 22 years of his life. That is the first thing the text wants you to see, and it matters enormously for what comes later. This is not a story about a righteous family that suffered an unfair intrusion of evil. This is a story about a deeply broken family in which evil was already living comfortably as a resident. The pit at Dothan did not come out of nowhere. It came out of decades of accumulated favoritism, rivalry, silence, and grievance. Sin does not usually arrive. Sin usually ripens. So let us look at the household honestly, because the honesty is the point. Jacob had 4 women who bore him children, Leah, Rachel, and their 2 handmaids Bilhah and Zilpah, and he loved exactly one of them, not loved more. The text is brutally direct in the earlier chapters. Leah was hated, unloved. She bore him son after son after son, and with each birth you can hear a woman's heart breaking in the names she chooses. Reuben had see a son, now surely my husband will love me. Simeon heard, because the Lord hath heard that I was hated. Levi joined, now this time will my husband be joined unto me, because I have borne him 3 sons, and she is still bargaining, still hoping, still hearing the silence in her own house. And then Judah, praise, I will praise the Lord. Something shifts in her there quietly, and we will come back to Judah later, because Judah is going to matter more than anyone expects. But understand what this means for the children. 12 sons growing up in a house with a visible hierarchy of love, 10 of them knowing, from the time they could perceive anything at all, that their mothers were not the beloved one, and therefore they were not the beloved ones. And then Rachel, the loved one, the chosen one, the one Jacob had worked 14 years for, finally, after years of barrenness, bears a son, Joseph. And everything Jacob had ever felt for Rachel poured itself into that boy. Now Israel loved Joseph more than all his children, because he was the son of his old age, more than all his children. The text does not soften it. It does not say Jacob had a special bond or a natural affinity, or that he understood Joseph better. It says he loved him more, and it says the brothers saw it, and he made him a coat of many colors. And when his brethren saw that their father loved him more than all his brethren, they hated him, and could not speak peaceably unto him. Let us stay with that coat for a moment, because it is more loaded than the Sunday school version suggests. The Hebrew is ketonet passim, and scholars have argued about it for centuries. It may mean a coat of many colors, as the old translations have it. It may mean a long-sleeved robe, reaching to the palms and the ankles. What is not in dispute is what such a garment signified in that world. It was not work clothing. You cannot herd sheep in it. You cannot climb a rocky hillside after a stray lamb with sleeves to your wrists and a hem at your ankles. It is the garment of someone who does not labor. It is the garment of a supervisor, an heir, a young man being marked out publicly as the one who will inherit. The only other place this exact phrase appears in the Hebrew Bible is on Tamar, a king's daughter, royal clothing. So Jacob did not merely give his son a nice gift. Jacob dressed a 17-year-old boy in the uniform of an heir and sent him out to work alongside 10 older brothers who had spent their entire lives being told, without words, that they were second. Every morning they put on wool and leather and went out into the dust and the heat. Every morning Joseph put on the coat. It was not affection. It was a declaration, and they read it correctly. Whatever else you say about those 10 men, they were not paranoid. They understood exactly what their father was saying because he was saying it loudly, in fabric, every single day. And this is worth pausing on, because it is one of the first hard truths this story offers. And it is a truth about the people who love you. Jacob loved Joseph genuinely. There is no question about the sincerity of that love. And Jacob's love, his real, deep, sincere, entirely genuine love, was the very thing that put his son in the pit. Love that is not governed by wisdom becomes a weapon in the hands of the one who feels it. Jacob's favoritism was not a small parenting mistake. It was the fuel. It was the accelerant poured over a household that was already dry as tinder from 20 years of resentment. And the coat was the match. Some of you know exactly what I am describing because you grew up in that house. Not this house, but a house like it. You know what it is to be the one in the coat and to be hated for something you did not choose. Or, and this is the harder confession, you know what it is to be one of the 10. To watch someone else be loved in a way you were not, through no fault of theirs, and to feel something curdle in you that you were ashamed of and could not stop. The text is not asking you to pick a side. The text is telling you that both positions are agony, and that God works in the middle of both. Now, into this household, God sends dreams. And I want you to notice the timing, because the timing is not accidental, and it is not gentle. Into a family, this fractured, this raw, this close to the edge, God sends a 17-year-old 2 dreams about his brothers bowing down to him. And Joseph, being 17, and being human, and being the favorite, and having no filter whatsoever, tells them, "Behold, we were binding sheaves in the field, and lo, my sheaf arose, and also stood upright. And behold, your sheaves stood round about, and made obeisance to my sheaf." His brother's response is one of the most darkly funny lines in Genesis, if you have the ear for it. "Shalt thou indeed reign over us? Or shalt thou indeed have dominion over us?" And they hated him yet the more for his dreams and for his words. And then, as if the first dream had gone so well, he has a second one and tells them that one too. The sun and the moon and 11 stars bowing down. This time even Jacob objects. "Shall I and thy mother and thy brethren indeed come to bow down ourselves to thee to the earth?" Now, here is where we have to be careful, because how you read this scene determines a great deal about how you read the rest of the story, and about how you read your own. The easy reading, the one you have probably heard, is that Joseph was an arrogant little brat who needed to be humbled, and the pit was God's tough love correction program. And 13 years of slavery was the curriculum. Joseph deserved it. He had it coming. He learned his lesson. I want to suggest carefully that this reading is both partly true and dangerously wrong. Partly true because, yes, the Joseph of chapter 37 is not the Joseph of chapter 45. There is a boy who tells his dreams to the very people the dreams are about, without an ounce of awareness of what he is doing to them. And there is a man who weeps so loudly in an Egyptian palace that the whole house hears it. Something changed. Something had to change. The 17-year-old is not ready to hold power without destroying people with it, and God knows this, but dangerously wrong because of where that reading takes you the next time you are in the pit. If Joseph's suffering was fundamentally punishment for his arrogance, then when you find yourself in the pit, your first and only question becomes, what did I do? What is God correcting? What sin is this the invoice for? And you will comb your life looking for the transgression that explains the catastrophe, and you will either find one that doesn't actually fit and torture yourself with it, or you will find nothing and conclude that God is arbitrary and cruel. That is where that road ends. I've watched people walk it. It ends badly. Look carefully at the text and notice what it does not say. It never says Joseph sinned in telling the dreams. It never rebukes him. The dreams were true. That is the crucial fact. Every word of them came to pass precisely decades later, when 11 men bowed with their faces to the ground in front of an Egyptian governor they did not recognize. God gave those dreams. God gave them to a 17-year-old who was not remotely equipped to carry them. That was not an accident, and it was not a mistake. And it was not God being careless. And notice too what Jacob does after objecting. But his father observed the saying. He kept it. He turned it over. Somewhere underneath the objection, the old deceiver, who had himself once had a dream of a ladder and angels, recognized the fingerprint of God on his son's life and could not let it go. So what was God doing? Here is what I want to propose, and it is going to take us the rest of this study to unfold it. God gave Joseph the dreams first, before the pit, precisely because Joseph was going to need them in the pit. Not as comfort. We have no evidence they comforted him, and considerable evidence that they tormented him. But as a fixed point, a splinter of promise lodged so deep in him that 13 years of catastrophe could not extract it. God did not give him the dreams because he was ready. God gave him the dreams because he was about to leave, and a man walking into 13 years of darkness needs to carry something in his pocket that darkness did not give him, and darkness cannot take away. And there is a second thing. The dreams were the reason for the pit. Read verse 20 again. Read what the brothers actually say to each other as he approaches. Come now, therefore, and let us slay him, and cast him into some pit, and we will say, some evil beast hath devoured him, and we shall see what will become of his dreams. We shall see what will become of his dreams. That is the sentence, that is the hinge of the entire narrative and possibly of the entire book of Genesis. The brothers are not merely committing fratricide out of jealousy. They are conducting an experiment. They are testing God. They are saying, there is a word from heaven over this boy's life, and we intend to find out whether that word can survive us. We shall see what becomes of it, and the horror and the glory of the next 13 chapters is that the pit is the road to the dreams. The very act designed to destroy the promise becomes the mechanism that fulfills it. They throw him in a pit to kill the dream, and the pit puts him on a caravan, and the caravan puts him in Egypt, and Egypt puts him in Potiphar's house, and Potiphar's wife puts him in prison, and prison puts him next to Pharaoh's butler, and the butler, eventually, finally 2 years late, puts him in front of Pharaoh, and Pharaoh puts him on a throne. And the throne is the exact place where 11 sheaves bow down to one. Every single step of that chain is a step his enemies took to stop it. Hold that. Hold it, because you are going to need it later. And because it is the thing Joseph could not see, and you can. The brothers ask, we shall see what will become of his dreams, and Genesis spends 13 chapters answering them, and the answer is, your hands are the ones that will build it. So Jacob sends him. And this is the detail that has haunted readers for 3,000 years, because Jacob sends him himself. Come, and I will send thee unto them. Go, I pray thee, see whether it be well with thy brethren, and well with the flocks, and bring me word again. Go see whether it is well with your brothers. Jacob has 10 sons out in the field, who cannot speak a peaceable word to the 11th. And he sends the 11th, alone, in the coat, to check on them. It is either staggering naivety or a father so accustomed to his own preferences that he genuinely cannot perceive what everyone else in his household can see plainly. And he will pay for that blindness with 22 years of grief so total that he refuses to be comforted. And Joseph says, and this is the line that breaks you if you sit with it long enough, here am I. Hineni. The word Abraham said on Moriah, the word Moses will say at the bush, the word Samuel will say in the dark, the word of total availability, here am I, send me. And the boy shoulders his coat and walks out of his father's tent and out of his father's life for 22 years, and the last thing he ever says to his father as a free man is yes. He goes to Shechem. They are not there. And here comes one of those small, strange verses that the narrator did not have to include, and yet did. And a certain man found him, and behold, he was wandering in the field, and the man asked him, saying, What seekest thou? And he said, I seek my brethren. Tell me, I pray thee, where they feed their flocks. A certain man, unnamed, appearing from nowhere in an empty field with exactly the information Joseph needs, and then vanishing from the story forever. Jewish tradition has long wondered whether this was an angel. The text will not tell us, but think about what this man does. He sends Joseph to the pit. If Joseph does not meet him, Joseph wanders in the field, fails to find his brothers, goes home, and nothing happens. No pit, no Egypt, no throne, no grain, no survival of the nation of Israel. This anonymous stranger in one sentence, in one throwaway exchange in an empty field, is the hinge on which the entire redemptive history of a people turns, and he has no idea. He thinks he is giving directions. I have heard they are gone hence, for I heard them say, Let us go to Dothan. Let that sit on you for a moment, because it is one of the quiet doctrines of this book. You will never know which of your ordinary Tuesdays was the hinge. You will never know which conversation, which small kindness, which offhand piece of information you gave to a stranger in a field was the thing God used to move a nation. The man in the field does not appear again. He never learns. He dies without ever knowing. And the whole story runs through him. You may be the man in the field for someone this week. You will probably not find out. So Joseph goes to Dothan. And now the geography turns cruel, because Dothan sits on the trade route, the road that runs from Gilead down to Egypt. Of all the fields in Canaan, the brothers have moved to the one with a highway running past it. And they saw him afar off. They can see him coming from a distance, and they know it is him. And how do they know? The coat. They can see the coat before they can see the face. And in the time it takes him to walk across that open ground toward them, and it must have been a long time, minutes and minutes of watching that garment approach, they have time to conspire. Behold, this dreamer cometh. Literally, in the Hebrew, this master of dreams. It is a sneer. Here comes the Lord of dreams. Come now, therefore, and let us slay him. And here Reuben intervenes. And Reuben is a study in himself, because Reuben is the man who almost does the right thing. He hears the plan, and he objects, let us not kill him. Shed no blood, but cast him into this pit that is in the wilderness, and lay no hand upon him. And the narrator tells us his motive, generously, that he might rid him out of their hands to deliver him to his father again. Reuben means well. Reuben has a plan. Reuben is going to come back later, secretly, and pull him out, and be the hero, and restore his standing with his father. Because Reuben, remember, is the firstborn who has already forfeited his place by sleeping with his father's concubine. And Reuben is desperate. So Reuben does the half measure. He does not confront. He does not say, this is monstrous, I will not permit it, over my body. He negotiates the murder down to a slow one and leaves the scene. And while he is gone, they sell the boy. That is the entire tragedy of Reuben in one line. He was against it. He genuinely was. He objected internally. He softened the plan. He intended to fix it later. And he was not there when it counted. He comes back to the pit and finds it empty, and he rends his clothes, and he cries out, the child is not, and I, whither shall I go? And it is far too late. There is a warning in Reuben for people who consider themselves the good ones in a bad room. The private objection you never voice. The compromise you make to keep the peace, telling yourself you will undo it later. The moment you step away because the confrontation is too expensive. Reuben's conscience was intact. Reuben's conscience saved no one. Evil does not require your participation. It only requires that you leave the room for 20 minutes. So they strip him. And here is a phrase the text lingers on with terrible precision. They stripped Joseph out of his coat of many colors that was on him. The narrator says the coat twice, slowly, as though the camera were holding on it. Because the coat is the whole thing. The coat is his father's love made visible. The coat is the dream made cloth. They do not just take his freedom, they take the sign. They tear the love off his body first, and then they throw the body in a hole. And the pit was empty. There was no water in it. No water. Which means he did not drown. Which means he lived. Which means he stood at the bottom of a dry cistern in the dark, with the walls higher than he could reach, and he screamed. We know he screamed. Not from chapter 37. Chapter 37 says nothing about it, and that silence is deliberate and awful. We know because 22 years later, in chapter 42, when these same men are standing in Egypt in trouble, it finally comes out of them. We are verily guilty concerning our brother, in that we saw the anguish of his soul when he besought us, and we would not hear. When he besought us and we would not hear, he begged. He was 17, and he was in a hole in the ground, and he begged his own brothers for his life, and they sat down to eat bread. That is verse 25. And they sat down to eat bread, and they lifted up their eyes and looked, and behold, a company of Ishmaelites came from Gilead. They ate lunch while he screamed. 10 men sitting in a circle, passing food, 20 feet from a hole with their brother's voice coming out of it. That is what the human heart is capable of, not monsters. Brothers, men who would go home to their wives that night and eat dinner and sleep. The most terrifying thing about Genesis 37 is not that it is barbaric. It is that it is ordinary. And then Judah sees the caravan, and Judah said unto his brethren, What profit is it if we slay our brother and conceal his blood? Come, and let us sell him to the Ishmaelites, and let not our hand be upon him, for he is our brother and our flesh. Read that carefully. Judah's argument is not moral, it is financial, dressed in the language of morality. What profit is it? There is no money in a corpse. He is our brother and our flesh. He says the right words while proposing to sell the flesh he is invoking, and they do it. 20 pieces of silver. 20. The standard price of a slave in that period. The Torah will later set the value of a male between 5 and 20 years old at exactly 20 shekels. A boy is worth 20 pieces of silver, divided 10 ways, which is 2 pieces of silver each, 2 pieces of silver per brother. That is what he was worth to them, 2 shekels apiece. And with that transaction, Judah invents something the world has been perfecting ever since. The profitable compromise, the evil that is 1 degree less evil than the alternative, and therefore feels like mercy, and pays. Remember Judah, because Judah is going to come back. Judah is going to walk through his own private hell in chapter 38, his own sons dying, his own deception exposed by a daughter-in-law he wronged, the words that will nearly break him, "She hath been more righteous than I." And 22 years from now, in a room in Egypt, Judah is going to stand in front of a man he does not recognize and offer his own body as a slave in exchange for his youngest brother's freedom. The man who sold a brother for silver becomes the man who buys a brother back with himself. And out of Judah, not Joseph, will come the tribe of kings, and David, and eventually a descendant who will do the same thing on a much larger scale, on a hill outside Jerusalem, offer himself in exchange for his brothers. God does not waste anyone in this story, not even the one who set the price. They take the coat, they kill a goat, they dip the coat in the blood and send it to their father, and they do not even have the courage to lie to his face. They send it. And they say, "This have we found. Know now whether it be thy son's coat or no. Know now whether it be thy son's coat." They will not name him. They cannot say Joseph. They say thy son, the one you loved, the one you chose. 22 years of hatred are compressed into those 2 words. And Jacob knew it and said, "It is my son's coat. An evil beast hath devoured him." Joseph is without doubt rent in pieces. Here is the goatskin and the garment again. Here is Jacob, who once put goatskin on his own arms and stood before his blind father in his brother's clothes and lied about who he was. Now holding a bloody garment and being lied to by his own sons with the blood of a goat. He deceived with a garment and an animal. He is deceived with a garment and an animal. Genesis does not moralize. Genesis just puts the 2 scenes near each other and lets you feel the floor drop. And Jacob rent his clothes and put sackcloth upon his loins and mourned for his son many days. And all his sons and all his daughters rose up to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted. And he said, "For I will go down into the grave unto my son mourning." All his sons rose up to comfort him, the men who did it, standing around their father's bed, patting his shoulder, offering comfort for a grief they manufactured for 22 years. 22 years of watching him weep at every anniversary, every family meal, every mention of the name, knowing every single time that the boy was alive and that a word from any one of them could end it, and not one of them ever said it. That is what unconfessed sin does to a family. It does not stay in the past. It becomes a permanent occupation, a full-time job, a lie that must be maintained daily for 2 decades. They did not sell their brother once. They sold him again every morning at breakfast for 22 years by saying nothing. And the chapter ends with one flat, devastating sentence. And the Midianites sold him into Egypt unto Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh's and captain of the guard. That is it. No commentary, no lament, no theological explanation, just a location and an owner. The favorite son of Jacob, heir of the covenant of Abraham, carrier of the promise, is now a line item in an Egyptian's household accounts. He is 17. He has lost his family, his freedom, his country, his language, his name, his coat, and his future in the space of a single afternoon, and no one has explained anything to him, and no one is going to. This is the part of your story you are living in right now, some of you. Not the throne, not the reunion. The part where the chapter ends with a flat sentence and no explanation, and God has not said anything, and you are just sold, located, owned by circumstances you did not choose. Stay with me. Because the very next verse, the first verse of the next chapter of Joseph's life, contains 5 words that change everything, and they are the 5 words this whole study turns on. And the Lord was with Joseph. That is the sentence. 5 words in English, 3 in Hebrew, Vayehi Yetwh et Yosef, and it is the load-bearing wall of the entire narrative. And I want you to notice with great care where the narrator chooses to put it. He does not put it in Hebron, in the tent, when Joseph is loved and safe and wearing the coat. He does not put it at the end, in the palace, when Joseph is second in Egypt and everything has worked out and the sentence would cost nothing to believe. He puts it here, in the slave quarters, in the exact verse where Joseph becomes property. And the Lord was with Joseph, and he was a prosperous man, and he was in the house of his master, the Egyptian. Read those 2 clauses next to each other and feel how they grind against each other. He was a prosperous man, and he was a slave in a foreigner's house, both at the same time, in the same sentence. The Bible refuses to let you separate them. This is where most of our theology quietly breaks, and I want to be honest about that rather than paper over it. We have been trained by 1,000 sermons and 100 worship songs and the whole ambient atmosphere of modern religion to read God's presence as a synonym for God's protection. If God is with me, then I will be safe. If God is with me, then the door will open. If God is with me, the diagnosis will come back clean, the job will come through, the marriage will hold, the child will come home. And so the logic runs backward with terrible efficiency. The diagnosis was bad, the door stayed shut, the marriage did not hold. Therefore God was not with me. Therefore I did something wrong. Therefore I am outside of something. Genesis 39 detonates that. God is with Joseph and Joseph is a slave. God is with Joseph and Joseph will be falsely accused. God is with Joseph and Joseph will go to prison. And the narrator will say it again in the cell. The Lord was with Joseph. The presence of God did not prevent the pit. The presence of God did not prevent the sale. The presence of God did not prevent the prison. The presence of God is not a force field, it is a person. And here is what I want you to hear, because I think some of you have been quietly convicting yourself for years on a charge that heaven never filed. You have looked at the wreckage of something in your life and concluded, in the part of you that does not say these things out loud, that God's absence is the explanation. That if he had been there, this would not have happened, and so you have been carrying not only the loss, but the abandonment on top of it, grief with a theological rider attached, doubling the weight. Genesis says no. Genesis says the Lord was with Joseph in the slave quarters. It says it flatly, without embarrassment, without explaining how those two things fit together, because it is not interested in making you comfortable. It is interested in telling you the truth. The truth is that God's presence and your suffering are not mutually exclusive. They have never been. They were not on Golgotha either, and that is not a coincidence. And I want to stay here a moment longer because I think this is the single most misunderstood idea in the modern religious mind, and it has done an extraordinary amount of quiet damage. We have inherited a picture of God's presence that is essentially meteorological. God's favor is good weather. If the sun is out, he is pleased. If the storm comes, something has gone wrong between us. And so we spend our lives reading our circumstances the way ancient sailors read the sky, trying to infer the mood of the deity from the conditions of the day. And the result is that our sense of being loved by God rises and falls with things that have nothing whatsoever to do with whether God loves us. A good quarter, a clean scan, a child who calls, "He is with me," a layoff, a betrayal, a diagnosis, "He has withdrawn." And underneath it all, never quite spoken, sits the most corrosive belief a human being can hold, that the love of God is conditional on outcomes I cannot control. Genesis 39 will not let you have that. It puts the sentence in the wrong place on purpose. The narrator could have written the Lord was with Joseph anywhere in this narrative. He could have put it at the top of chapter 41 in the throne room, where it would have been obvious and cheap and everyone would have nodded. Instead, he puts it here in the sentence where a 17-year-old becomes another man's property, and he puts it again in the prison, and the effect is a kind of theological detonation. Whatever God's presence is, it is not the absence of catastrophe. It is something else entirely, and it is available in places where catastrophe has already happened and is not going to be reversed. And notice the direction of the movement. The narrator does not say God visited Joseph in Egypt, as though God were making a trip. He says the Lord was with Joseph. The phrasing implies accompaniment, not arrival. God did not meet Joseph in Egypt. God walked to Egypt with him. He was there on the road behind the caravan. He was there in the market when the price was agreed. He was in the pit on the day the brothers ate their bread 20 feet away, and he did not stop it, and he did not leave. That is a harder God to explain than the one who fixes things. It is also, I would suggest, the only God who is any use to you at 3 in the morning. Now watch what the presence of God actually does in Joseph's life, because it is not nothing. It is just not what we expected. And his master saw that the Lord was with him, and that the Lord made all that he did to prosper in his hand. His master saw it. Potiphar, an Egyptian, a polytheist, captain of Pharaoh's guard, a man with no theological framework for the God of Abraham whatsoever, looked at this Hebrew slave and drew a conclusion about the invisible. He could not see God. He could see Joseph. And what he saw in Joseph was so consistent, so competent, so unexplainable by ordinary means, that a pagan military officer concluded there was a deity behind it. Sit with that for a second. Joseph did not preach to Potiphar. There is no sermon recorded. There is no evangelistic conversation. There is a young man who had every conceivable justification for bitterness, doing his work, sorting grain, keeping accounts, managing a household in a language he had to learn from scratch, with such integrity and such excellence that his owner became a theologian. That is what God's presence looked like in a slave's life. Not escape, not rescue, not a miracle at the gate. Competence, integrity, and an inexplicable weight of blessing on ordinary labor in a place he never chose, doing work he never applied for a man who owned him. And I need to say something here that our culture will resist, and I want to say it gently, but I do not want to soften it into nothing. Joseph did excellent work as a slave, not as a career move, not because it was fair. There was no fairness available. He had been kidnapped and trafficked and sold, and the God he served had not said one word to him in explanation, and the situation was not going to be redeemed by his good attitude. And he did the work anyway, and he did it well. We tend to think of faithfulness as something you do when you can see it paying off. Joseph's faithfulness in Potiphar's house had no visible horizon. He was not building toward anything. As far as he could possibly know, this was his life now. He would be a slave in this house until he died in this house, and the accounts he kept, and the grain he tracked, and the excellence he poured into it would amount to nothing at all except a slightly better run estate for a man who bought him. He had no reason to believe otherwise, and he was faithful anyway. That is the difference between hope and strategy. Strategy is faithfulness with an expected return. Hope is faithfulness without one. Joseph had no strategy. He had a splinter of a dream from when he was 17, going quieter every year, and he had a God who had not spoken, and he had a set of accounts to keep, and he kept them well. Some of you are in Potiphar's house right now. You are doing work no one sees, in a situation you did not choose. That is not going to change, and there's no evidence that it matters. A marriage you are holding together alone. A parent you are caring for who no longer knows your name and will not get better and will not thank you. A job that is beneath what you trained for, that you took because the bills do not care about your dignity. A ministry with 11 people in it that will never grow. And you have started to wonder what the point of doing it well is, when doing it badly would produce the same visible result. The point is that the Lord is with you in it, and Potiphar is watching, and Potiphar does not know he is watching, and it worked. It came to pass from the time that he had made him overseer in his house and over all that he had, that the Lord blessed the Egyptian's house for Joseph's sake. Look at that. The Egyptian's house was blessed for Joseph's sake. A pagan household in a pagan empire receives the blessing of the God of Abraham, because there is one faithful slave in it. That is the Abrahamic promise operating. In thee shall all families of the earth be blessed. It is operating through a trafficked teenager who does not know it is operating. Joseph thinks he is running an estate. Joseph is fulfilling a covenant. And he left all that he had in Joseph's hand, and he knew not aught he had, save the bread which he did eat. Potiphar has stopped keeping track of anything except what is on his own plate. That is total trust. That is a man who has handed his entire life to a slave and does not even look at the books anymore. In roughly a decade, Joseph has gone from a hole in the ground in Canaan to running one of the most powerful households in Egypt. And do you see what is happening? Do you see what God is actually doing in these years? He is training him. Because the 17-year-old in the coat could not have run Egypt. He could not have run a granary. He could not have run a conversation with his own brothers without detonating the room. He had a dream about ruling and absolutely no capacity to rule. And so God puts him in an Egyptian household, where he learns the language, learns the culture, learns the bureaucracy, learns Egyptian administration and accounting and logistics, and how power actually functions in this specific empire. And he learns all of it from the bottom, from the position of the person power is used on. Every skill Joseph will need to save the world in chapter 41, he is acquiring in chapters 39 and 40, in the two places he would never have chosen: a slave's quarters and a prison cell. There is no other curriculum for what he is being prepared to do. You cannot learn Egyptian administration in Hebron. You cannot learn what it costs to be the powerless while you are the favorite. God is not wasting these years. God is not idling. God is not waiting for the real thing to start. This is the real thing. The pit was not an interruption of the plan. The pit was the first day of school, and I want to name the hard edge of that, because I do not want to sell you a comfortable version of this. It does not mean the evil was good. It does not mean the brothers were instruments doing God's bidding and therefore blameless. Joseph will say to their faces, decades later, "Ye thought evil against me." And he does not retract it. He does not soften it. He does not say, "It all worked out, so let's call it even." The evil was evil. It stayed evil. God did not need it, and God did not author it. But God is capable of taking what was designed to end you and using it as raw material for what he intends. Both things are true, and the Bible holds them together without flinching. And any theology that drops one of them for the comfort of the other has stopped being Christian. And then it all collapses. And it happened after these things that his master's wife cast her eyes upon Joseph, and she said, "Lie with me." The text is almost brutally brief about it. 2 words in Hebrew. No seduction scene, no build, no romance, a command, because that is what it is. This is not primarily a story about lust. This is a story about power. She is the mistress of the house, and he is property. She is not asking. She has said the sentence 100 times to 100 servants, and the sentence has always worked, because the sentence is not a request. And Joseph refuses. And look at how he refuses, because this is one of the great speeches of the Old Testament, and it is delivered by a slave to his owner's wife with his life in the balance. "Behold, my master wotteth not what is with me in the house, and he hath committed all that he hath to my hand. There is none greater in this house than I, neither hath he kept back anything from me but thee, because thou art his wife. How then can I do this great wickedness and sin against God?" 3 arguments. And watch the order. First, loyalty to Potiphar. This man trusted me with everything. Second, the boundary is not arbitrary. Thou art his wife. And third, the one that towers over the other 2, and sin against God. Against God, not against Potiphar. Not against Egyptian law, not against his own future prospects. Now stop and consider what that sentence means from where Joseph is standing. He is speaking about a God who, from his experience, has done nothing for him. God did not stop the pit. God did not stop the caravan. God did not stop the sail. God has not spoken to him in 11 years. His father thinks he is dead. His brothers are living free lives in Canaan with his blood on their hands and no consequences at all. There is no evidence, none, zero, anywhere in Joseph's visible world that fidelity to this God pays. And in that condition, a slave with no rights, no witnesses, no prospects, and no explanation from heaven says, "How then can I do this great wickedness and sin against God?" That is not obedience for reward. There is no reward on the table. That is not obedience because it works. Nothing has worked. That is a man who has decided that God's character is a fact about the universe and not a function of his circumstances. That is faith with the incentive stripped out, which is the only kind that ever gets tested and the only kind that ever holds. And I want to press this because we live in a religious culture that has monetized the opposite. Obey and it will go well with you. Tithe and the windows of heaven will open. Stay pure and God will bring you a spouse. And the moment obedience stops producing returns, the whole structure implodes, and people walk away from God saying, "I did everything right and it didn't work." Which is, if you listen closely, an admission that they were never worshiping God. They were worshiping the returns. Joseph had no returns. Joseph had 11 years of contrary evidence. Joseph said no anyway, and she came at him day by day, day by day. This was not one moment of temptation resisted in a burst of heroism. This was a grinding daily siege. A woman with total power over his life, asking every single day, for however long this went on, and every single day he had to decide again. Nobody gets to make this decision once. He hearkened not unto her, to lie by her, or to be with her. He would not even be near her. He restructured his entire movement through the house to avoid a room. And then the day comes when the house is empty, and there was none of the men of the house there within. No witnesses, complete deniability, the perfect crime from a strictly practical standpoint. And she caught him by his garment, saying, "Lie with me." And he left his garment in her hand and fled, and got him out. He left his garment in her hand, and there it is again, the garment. Do you see it? For the second time in his life, Joseph loses everything through a piece of clothing torn off his body and used as false evidence against him. The coat was stripped from him and dipped in goat's blood and shown to his father. Know now whether it be thy son's coat. Now the robe is torn from him and held up in front of the household. See, he hath brought in an Hebrew unto us to mock us. Twice. The same weapon, the same mechanism, torn cloth, false testimony, a life destroyed. And I want you to notice what it means that he fled and left it. The garment was the evidence that would convict him, and he knew it, and he left it anyway, because staying to negotiate for it would have cost him more than the garment was worth. There is a whole doctrine of temptation in that. Some things you do not resist, some things you do not reason with, some things you do not stay in the room and argue about, because the argument is the trap. You run, and you let it have your coat, and you take the consequences of running rather than the consequences of staying. Joseph would rather be falsely convicted than truly guilty, and he made that trade in a fraction of a second, in an empty house, with no one watching. He got it right, and it destroyed his life. Say that out loud, because our theology needs to hear it. He got it right, and it destroyed his life. He passed the test, and the reward was prison. There is no verse in Genesis 39 where God shows up and vindicates him. There is no lightning. Potiphar's wife lies, and the lie works, and Joseph goes to the dungeon, and God says nothing. And this is precisely where people lose their faith. Not in the pit, but here. The pit you can blame on your brothers. But this, doing the right thing at enormous personal cost and being punished for it while God watches in silence, that is the thing that breaks people. Because now the accusation is not against your brothers. Now the accusation is against God. Notice the phrasing of the charge, by the way. She does not say Joseph. She says the Hebrew servant. See, he hath brought in an Hebrew unto us to mock us. She reaches instantly for the ethnic sneer, playing on the resentment she knows is already in that household toward the foreigner her husband elevated over everyone. And notice, she implicates Potiphar too. He hath brought in, this is your fault, you brought him here. Even in her lie, she is punishing her husband. Nothing in this scene is clean, and Potiphar, his wrath was kindled, and he throws Joseph in prison. Here is a thing worth pausing on, because it is strange, and the strangeness is a mercy. The penalty for a slave who assaulted his master's wife in ancient Egypt was death, immediate, unquestioned, unremarkable death. Potiphar was captain of the guard. The executioner's office was literally his. He could have killed Joseph in the courtyard that afternoon, and no one on earth would have thought twice about it. He put him in prison instead. And not just any prison, a place where the king's prisoners were bound. The political prison, the facility attached to the royal house, which is to say, the exact building where Pharaoh's own disgraced officials were kept. Why? Ask yourself, did Potiphar believe his wife? A man who had handed his entire estate to this slave, who had stopped counting his own possessions because the trust was total, is asked to believe that this man, on this one afternoon, threw all of it away. Perhaps his wrath was not kindled against Joseph at all. Perhaps he knew exactly what his wife was, and had known for years, and could not say so publicly without destroying his own household and his own honor in a society where such things mattered more than truth. So he does the thing men in his position have always done. He protects the lie, and he protects the man, and he splits the difference, and Joseph pays. Joseph is a casualty of someone else's cowardice. Not the last time in this story. Probably not the last time in yours. And so Joseph goes to prison, innocent, convicted of the exact opposite of what he did, stripped for the second time, betrayed for the second time. And the narrator, having watched all of it, having watched the false accusation and the unjust conviction and the silence of heaven, writes one more time, in the dark at the bottom, "But the Lord was with Joseph. But the Lord was with Joseph, and showed him mercy, and gave him favor in the sight of the keeper of the prison." And so it begins again. And this is the part of Joseph's story that I think is the hardest. And it is the part that gets preached the least because it does not fit on a poster. Look at the shape of what is happening to him. In Potiphar's house he rose, slowly over years, from the bottom of a foreign household to running the whole estate. He built something. He had status, responsibility, respect, a life, as much of a life as a slave can have. And then in one afternoon it was gone, and he was back at the bottom, in a worse place than before. And now in prison, he does it again. And the keeper of the prison committed to Joseph's hand all the prisoners that were in the prison, and whatsoever they did there, he was the doer of it. Again, the same pattern. He rises. He is competent, he is trustworthy, he is excellent, and the man in charge stops watching him because there is no need. The keeper of the prison looked not to anything that was under his hand, because the Lord was with him. Word for word, almost exactly what was said about Potiphar. He built the same thing twice in two different holes and lost it once already. Now here is what I want you to feel. And it requires you to stop reading this as a story you know the end of. Joseph does not know the end. Joseph, sitting in that prison, has now watched himself build a life from nothing and have it destroyed by a lie. Once. And he is now building it again. And every single brick he lays knowing, from direct personal recent experience, that a single sentence from a single liar can take all of it away in an afternoon, and there will be no appeal, and God will not intervene. Do you understand how much harder it is to build the second time? The first time you are naive. The first time you do not know. But once you have watched it burn, once you have poured a decade of faithfulness into something and watched it evaporate because of someone else's lie, the second building requires a kind of courage the first one never did. Anyone can be faithful before they have been betrayed. Joseph is being faithful after. Some of you are there, not in the pit, past the pit. You are in the rebuilding, and it is not inspiring, and no one is applauding, and the thing that makes it almost unbearable is not the work. It is the knowledge. You know now. You know it can all be taken. You know that doing everything right guarantees nothing, and you are getting up and doing it right anyway. And that is not naive optimism. That is not positive thinking. That is one of the most genuinely heroic things a human being can do. And I want to say to you plainly, God sees it. The narrator is writing it down. The Lord is with you in the second building the same way he was in the first. And how long is he in there? The text does not tell us directly, but we can do the arithmetic. He was 17 when he was sold. He is 30 when he stands before Pharaoh. 13 years total. Some of that is Potiphar's house, perhaps 10 or 11, given the trajectory from newly purchased foreign slave to overseer of the entire estate, which leaves somewhere in the range of 2 to 3 years in that cell, minimum, with the last 2 of them explicitly counted by the narrator in a way that will make you wince. 13 years. Let me make that real, because 13 years is a phrase and lived time is not a phrase. Think about where you were 13 years ago. Think about who you were. Think about everything that has happened in your life in that span. The people who have come and gone, the addresses, the jobs, the funerals, the children who were born and learned to walk and talk and read. That is how long Joseph was gone. That is not a season. That is not a rough patch. That is the entire arc of his 20s. the decade in which a man in that world would marry, have children, establish himself, build a name, all of it gone. Spent in a foreign house and a foreign cell, owned, forgotten, silent. Meanwhile, and this is the part that would poison anyone, his brothers are fine. They are in Canaan, they are marrying, they are raising children, they are eating dinner at their father's table. Nothing happened to them. There was no consequence, no exposure, no reckoning. The universe simply absorbed their crime and moved on, and they got to keep their lives, and Joseph got to lose his. And if there is a formula for producing bitterness in a human soul, that is it. My suffering is total and undeserved, their guilt is total and unpunished, and God has said nothing about any of it. And this, right here, is where I want to put the question this whole study is circling, because I do not want to sail past it with a nice phrase. Where was God? Not rhetorically. Actually, where was He? Because Joseph is going to say, at the end, God meant it unto good. And that sentence is either the most important thing ever said about suffering, or it is an obscenity, depending entirely on whether it is true. And you cannot know whether it is true until you have let the question sit at full weight. Where was God when the ropes went around a 17-year-old and he was lowered into a dry cistern by his own brothers? Where was God when they ate lunch while he screamed? Where was God when a woman lied and a man believed her because it was convenient? Where was God for 13 years of silence? Genesis gives an answer, but it doesn't give it in the form of an explanation. And I think that distinction matters more than almost anything else in this study. The answer Genesis gives is not why. The answer Genesis gives is with. The Lord was with Joseph. That is the only thing the narrator will say, and he says it 4 times, and every single time he says it in a place of degradation, never in the palace, only in the slave quarters and the cell. That is not the answer we want. I know it is not. We want the transcript. We want the memo from heaven explaining the strategic purpose of each year. Joseph never got that. And here is the thing that ought to stop us cold. Joseph never got it even at the end. Even in chapter 50, when he says God meant it unto good, he is not reciting an explanation he was given. He is offering an interpretation he arrived at decades later, looking backward, from a place he could never have anticipated. Nobody ever told Joseph why. He figured out what it was for, and he did it in retrospect. And even then, he did not get an accounting of the individual years. You will probably not get the transcript either. I am not going to promise you one. What Genesis promises is not an explanation. It is a presence, and a claim about what that presence is doing with the wreckage while you cannot see it. And now, the butler and the baker. And it came to pass after these things that the butler of the king of Egypt and his baker had offended their lord, the king of Egypt. And Pharaoh was wroth against 2 of his officers. 2 of Pharaoh's household officials fall from favor and land in the same prison, and who is assigned to look after them? And the captain of the guard charged Joseph with them, and he served them. He served them. The Hebrew word is the same root used for ministry, for attendance. A Hebrew slave, unjustly imprisoned, waiting on 2 Egyptian aristocrats who are in this cell for a season and will probably go home. He serves them. He brings their food. He attends to them. He does it apparently well. And then one morning, and Joseph came in unto them in the morning and looked upon them, and behold, they were sad. Stop right there, please. Because that single verse is one of the most extraordinary things in the whole book, and everybody reads straight past it. Joseph looked at them and noticed they were sad. This man has been in prison for years for a crime he did not commit. He has been enslaved, trafficked, falsely accused, and forgotten. If anyone in that building has earned the right to be entirely absorbed in his own suffering, to walk through his days with his eyes down and his heart closed, to have precisely 0 attention left over for the emotional state of 2 Egyptian officials who will be released while he rots, it is Joseph. And he walks in, and he sees their faces, and he asks, "Wherefore look ye so sadly today?" Suffering does one of two things to a human being. It either turns you inward until you cannot see anyone but yourself, until every conversation is about your loss, every room is measured by your pain, and other people become either an audience for it or an irrelevance. Or it cracks you open and makes you the most perceptive person in the room because you have learned what a face looks like when someone is drowning behind it. Joseph noticed. 13 years in, and the man has not gone blind. That, right there, is the miracle. Not the dreams, not the palace. The fact that a man who had every reason on earth to be consumed by his own catastrophe walked into a room and saw somebody else's. And notice what he says next. Do not interpretations belong to God? Tell me them, I pray you. Interpretations belong to God. Here is a man whose entire disaster began with dreams, whose own 2 dreams put him in this cell, whose brothers sneered, "Here comes the master of dreams," as they planned his death. And he has not become cynical about dreams. He has not said, "Dreams are what ruined me." He has not said, "I had dreams once, look where it got me, keep yours to yourself." 13 years of catastrophe. And Joseph still believes God speaks, still believes God interprets, still believes the invisible world is real and active and good. Where does that come from? He has no scripture. There is no Bible. There is no synagogue, no priest, no community of faith, no worship service, no one in the entire nation of Egypt who has heard of the God of Abraham. He has been alone with this God, in silence for over a decade, in 2 prisons and a slave's quarters, and he still says interpretations belong to God. I think about that a great deal. What was he doing all those years? What do you do with 13 years of nothing? He had no distractions, no screen, no noise, no way to numb it. Just the dark, and his own mind, and the memory of a promise made to a boy who no longer existed. And somewhere in there, in a way the text refuses to describe, and I think the refusal is deliberate, he built something. Not a strategy, not an escape plan, something interior, a conviction, hammered out with no external support of any kind, that God was real and God was good and God was not finished. That is the real work of the 13 years. Egypt is teaching him administration. The silence is teaching him God. And so he interprets the butler's dream, 3 branches, 3 days, restoration. And Joseph tells him the good news, and here is the first crack in the granite, the first time in the entire narrative that we hear Joseph ask for anything at all. But think on me when it shall be well with thee, and show kindness, I pray thee, unto me, and make mention of me unto Pharaoh, and bring me out of this house. For indeed I was stolen away out of the land of the Hebrews, and here also have I done nothing that they should put me into the dungeon. Think on me, remember me, mention me. That is Joseph's only recorded prayer in the entire narrative, and it is addressed to a cupbearer. He does not ask God, he asks a man. And I do not say that as an accusation. I say it because it is unbearably human, and it is the most relatable thing he does. 13 years of silence from heaven, and when a door finally cracks open, Joseph does not lift his eyes up. He grabs the sleeve of the person nearest the exit. Remember me, please. I was stolen. I did nothing. Just say my name to someone who can do something. Have you ever been there? At the end of your reserves, and something that looks like a way out appears, and you find yourself putting all your hope on a person, a doctor, a lawyer, an interview, a friend who said they would make a call, not because you have stopped believing in God, but because God has been quiet for so long, and this person is right here, and they have a mouth and Pharaoh's ear. And the baker hears the good interpretation and asks for his own. And Joseph, and this is the measure of the man, tells him the truth. 3 days, and Pharaoh will lift up thy head from off thee. He does not soften it. He does not lie to a man he has served and lived beside to spare himself the discomfort of delivering it. He tells him he is going to die in 3 days because the interpretations belong to God and the truth belongs to God, and Joseph will not counterfeit either one, even out of kindness. Especially out of kindness. 3 days later, Pharaoh's birthday, the butler is restored, the baker is hanged, exactly as Joseph said, to the day. And then comes the worst verse in the book. Yet did not the chief butler remember Joseph, but forgat him. Read it again. It says it twice. Did not remember, forgat him. The narrator says it twice, deliberately, because he wants you to feel the redundancy of it. He did not remember, and then, as though remembering were something that could still happen later, and then did not, he forgot. Joseph asked one man for one thing. Think on me. Say my name. And the man walked out of that prison into the sunlight and into his old job and his old wine cups and his old life, and he never thought about him again. And then Genesis does the cruelest thing in the entire book. It ends the chapter there. And the very next verse, the first verse of chapter 41, says, "And it came to pass at the end of 2 full years," 2 full years, not 2 years, 2 full years. The Hebrew has that word, full, complete, entire, and it is the narrator who does not have to be there, putting his thumb on the scale of your heart. Every day of those 2 years was a full day, 730 of them. Every morning, Joseph woke up in that cell, and the first thought that crossed his mind, I promise you it was the first thought, was, maybe today. Maybe today the door opens. Maybe today the butler remembered. Maybe today, at last, someone says my name in the palace, and every night for 730 nights he lay down, and it had not happened. That is a specific kind of suffering, and it is worse than the pit. The pit is acute. The pit is horror, and horror at least has adrenaline. This is chronic. This is hope arriving and leaving over and over and over until hope itself becomes the instrument of torture. Anyone can survive a catastrophe. What kills people is the slow leak. It is the maybe today, 730 times, each one a little quieter, each one costing a little more to say, until one day you notice that you did not say it that morning at all, and you cannot remember when you stopped. That is the moment. That is the moment Joseph's faith had to hold, and it is the moment yours has to hold, not the disaster, the aftermath, not the pit, the 2 full years in which nothing whatsoever happens and no one is coming, and the last door you had already closed. And here is the thing I need you to see, because it is the whole architecture of this story, and if you miss it, you miss everything. Those 2 years were not wasted. Those 2 years were the point. Because, think about it, what if the butler had remembered? What if he had walked out of prison and said to Pharaoh 3 days later, "Your Majesty, there is a Hebrew in your dungeon who interprets dreams, and he asked me to mention him." What happens then, on the best possible day? Best case, Pharaoh, mildly interested, grants a favor to a returning official. Joseph is released. He is a free foreigner in Egypt with no money, no family, no standing, and a criminal record for assaulting a nobleman's wife. He is not made governor. There is no famine yet. There is nothing for him to do. He goes home to Canaan if he can afford the journey, and he confronts his brothers with 13 years of rage and no leverage and no forgiveness in him yet. And there is no grain and no reconciliation and no salvation. And when the famine comes, because it is coming regardless, his entire family starves to death in Canaan, and the promise to Abraham dies with them. The butler's memory would have saved Joseph and destroyed everything. Do you see it? The forgetting was the mercy. Joseph had to be in that cell on the exact morning Pharaoh woke up disturbed, not a day earlier, not a day later. The whole thing, the survival of the covenant family, the preservation of the line that leads to David and eventually to Bethlehem. The whole thing hinges on a cupbearer having a bad memory for exactly 730 days, and then, at breakfast on precisely the right morning, suddenly recalling a face. God was not absent during those 2 years. God was not distracted. God was holding a door shut. And it felt from the inside exactly like being forgotten by everyone in the world. That is the thing I most want you to carry out of this study, and I want to say it as plainly as I know how. The door that will not open is sometimes being held, not stuck, not neglected, held by a hand you cannot see on the other side for a reason that has not happened yet. And there is no way, none, to tell the difference from where you are standing. It feels identical. Being forgotten and being protected feel exactly the same in year 2. There is no interior sensation that distinguishes them, which is why this is called faith and not knowledge, and why Joseph could not have known, and why you cannot either. I want to press on this a little further because I think it deserves more than a nice paradox and a move on. Consider what it would have required for Joseph to know. It would have required God to explain the famine 7 years before it happened to a slave in a dungeon in order to justify a delay. It would have required heaven to lay out the entire geopolitical architecture of the ancient Near East, the coming drought, the movement of nations, the survival of a family in Canaan, the 400 years of Egypt, the Exodus, the covenant, the whole descending line that arrives eventually at a stable, all of it explained to a man in a cell so that he could feel better about a cupbearer's memory. That is what God, tell me why, is actually asking for. Not a sentence, the whole tapestry, viewed from the front, from the only vantage point that exists, which is God's, and which is by definition not available to you, because if it were available to you, you would be God, and none of this would be necessary. We ask for the why, and we imagine it would satisfy us. I am not sure it would. I have watched people receive explanations for their suffering, real ones, true ones, years later, and I have watched the explanation land and do almost nothing, because the explanation was never actually what the wound was asking for. The wound was not asking for information. The wound was asking whether it was alone. And that is the thing Genesis answers 4 times in the worst rooms of the story. The Lord was with Joseph, so the 2 years pass. And the extraordinary thing, the thing the narrator does not comment on at all, is that Joseph is still there, still functioning, still running the prison, still presumably doing the accounts and managing the men and getting up in the morning. He did not disintegrate. Something in him held that had no external support of any kind, no church, no scripture, no friend, no sign, no word. And now, not even the thin thread of the butler's promise. Everything that could be taken from him had been taken, including, finally, hope itself. And there was still a man in that cell. I do not know how. The text will not tell us. But I notice that when Pharaoh's summons finally comes, Joseph is not bitter, not broken, not incoherent, not ranting. He is ready. Somehow in the dark, with nothing, over 730 mornings of nothing happening, he was being made ready. And then, on an ordinary night, in a palace, a man who has never thought about Joseph for a single second in his life has a bad dream. And it came to pass at the end of 2 full years that Pharaoh dreamed. Notice how the deliverance arrives. Not through the door Joseph knocked on, not through the butler's kindness, not through Joseph's request or his strategy or his effort or anything he did at all. Joseph did not orchestrate one atom of this. Joseph is asleep in a cell, 13 years into the worst thing that ever happened to him, having long since stopped expecting anything. And 2 miles away, God troubles the sleep of the most powerful man on earth. The deliverance does not come through the door you have been pounding on. It comes through a door you did not know existed, in a building you have never entered, in the mind of a man who does not know your name. Pharaoh dreams of 7 fat cows, eaten by 7 gaunt ones, and 7 full ears of grain devoured by 7 withered ones. And he wakes up shaken, and his spirit was troubled. And he sent and called for all the magicians of Egypt, and all the wise men thereof. And Pharaoh told them his dream. But there was none that could interpret them unto Pharaoh. None of them. The entire intellectual apparatus of the most advanced civilization on earth. The scholars, the priests, the professional dream interpreters of a culture that had literal manuals for this, whole libraries of dream interpretation, a discipline refined over 1,000 years, and not one of them can say a word. Egypt's best minds stand in a room and produce nothing. That is not a coincidence either. God shut their mouths the same way he shut the butler's memory. The stage has to be completely empty before the right man walks onto it, and then the butler remembers. Then spake the chief butler unto Pharaoh, saying, I do remember my faults this day. I do remember my faults this day. What a sentence! He does not say, I remember Joseph. He says, I remember my faults, meaning his own imprisonment, his own disgrace, his own story. And oh yes, incidentally, there was a Hebrew there. He remembers Joseph only as a footnote to his own biography. There was with us there a young man, an Hebrew, servant to the captain of the guard. A young man, an Hebrew, a servant, 3 dismissals in a single line. He does not even use his name. 13 years of a man's life, the interpretation that saved this butler from despair and turned out to be exactly, precisely true. And he cannot be troubled to say, Joseph. The instrument of your deliverance may not care about you at all. He may not remember your name. He may mention you as a footnote in a story about himself on a day when it happens to be useful to him. And God will use him anyway, because God is not limited to working through people who love you. Then Pharaoh sent and called Joseph, and they brought him hastily out of the dungeon, hastily, in a moment. After 13 years of nothing moving at all, the world moves so fast it makes you dizzy. That is how it goes, so often. Years and years of nothing, and then a Tuesday afternoon that reorders your entire life in 90 minutes. Joseph woke up that morning a prisoner with no prospects and no future, and he did not know, he could not have known, that this was the last morning. There was no sign. It was just another day. He had no way to distinguish it from the 729 that came before, which means, incidentally, that you do not know either. You cannot tell this morning whether this is day 400 or day 730. It looks the same either way. That is not a comfort exactly, but it is a true thing, and true things hold weight that comforting things do not. And he shaved himself and changed his raiment and came in unto Pharaoh, the garment a 3rd time. They shaved him, Egyptian custom. Hebrews wore beards, Egyptians did not. And you do not stand before Pharaoh looking like a foreigner. And they dressed him, a 3rd garment. The coat was stripped and bloodied. The robe was torn and used as false evidence. And now a 3rd time clothing is put on him, and this one he will not lose. And Pharaoh said unto Joseph, I have dreamed a dream, and there is none that can interpret it. And I have heard say of thee that thou canst hear a dream to interpret it. Now, here is the moment. Everything is on the line. 13 years of hell, and here stands the one man on earth who can undo all of it with a word. Joseph is 30 years old, and he has one sentence to get right. And what does he say? And Joseph answered Pharaoh, saying, It is not in me. God shall give Pharaoh an answer of peace. It is not in me. He is standing in front of the most powerful human being alive, who has just told him he has a reputation as an interpreter of dreams, who is holding the keys to his freedom. And the first thing out of Joseph's mouth is a denial of his own ability. Not false modesty, not strategy. He tells a god king to his face in the throne room of Egypt that the answer is going to come from a god Pharaoh has never heard of, and that Joseph himself has nothing to do with it. 13 years earlier, a boy stood in a tent and could not stop talking about his dreams and what they meant about him. Now a man stands in a palace and the first thing he says is, "It is not in me." There is the whole 13 years right there in one sentence. That is what the pit was for. That is what Potiphar's house was for. That is what the cell and the forgetting and the 2 full years were for. Not to break him, to hollow out the place where the ego was, so that when the power finally came, it would have nowhere to lodge. Because here is what nobody tells you about the throne. The throne would have killed him. The 17-year-old who told his brothers about the sheaves would have been given absolute power over the food supply of the ancient world, and he would have been a monster within a year. Absolute power does not create character. It reveals it, and then it magnifies it. And there was not enough character in that boy to survive the magnification. God had 13 years of work to do on a man before he could safely answer his prayer. I want to say that again, slowly, because for some of you, it is the whole reason you're listening tonight. God had work to do on the man before he could safely give him what he had promised him. The delay was not indifference. The delay was construction. The dream was real. The dream was always real. The dream was never in question, was never in. What was in question was whether the dreamer would survive its fulfillment. And there is a mercy in that which is almost too heavy to look at directly. Sometimes the reason the answer has not come is that the answer would destroy you today. And God is not willing to destroy you in order to be prompt, Joseph interprets. 7 years of plenty, 7 years of famine. The doubling of the dream means the thing is established by God, and God will shortly bring it to pass. And then, without being asked, without being invited, entirely unprompted, Joseph does something extraordinary. He gives Pharaoh a policy proposal. Now therefore, let Pharaoh look out a man discreet and wise, and set him over the land of Egypt. Let Pharaoh do this, and let him appoint officers over the land, and take up the 5th part of the land of Egypt in the 7 plenteous years. And let them gather all the food of those good years that come, and lay up corn under the hand of Pharaoh. A prisoner, 5 minutes out of the dungeon, is telling the king of Egypt how to restructure the national economy. And where did he learn it? Potiphar's house. Supply, storage, staffing, distribution, the management of a great estate. The prison, administration of people, records, logistics, the handling of the powerless. 13 years of the most specific and useless-seeming education imaginable, and it turns out to be exactly, precisely, the training for this one conversation. Nothing was wasted. Not 1 year, not one skill, not one humiliating, invisible, thankless task in a foreign kitchen or a dungeon storeroom. It was all curriculum. And Pharaoh said unto his servants, Can we find such a one as this is, a man in whom the Spirit of God is? The pagan king says it, just like Potiphar said it. The Egyptians keep seeing God in this man that God has not spoken to in 13 years. That is the strange comedy of it. Everyone can see the presence of God on Joseph's life, except Joseph. And Pharaoh said unto Joseph, Forasmuch as God hath showed thee all this, there is none so discreet and wise as thou art. Thou shalt be over my house, and according unto thy word shall all my people be ruled. Only in the throne will I be greater than thou. In a single conversation. From the dungeon to the 2nd highest office in the world's greatest empire, in the span of one morning. And Pharaoh took off his ring from his hand, and put it upon Joseph's hand, and arrayed him in vestures of fine linen, and put a gold chain about his neck. And he made him to ride in the 2nd chariot which he had, and they cried before him, Bow the knee, bow the knee. 13 years ago, 10 men laughed at a boy and said, "Shalt thou indeed have dominion over us?" And they sold him for 2 shekels each to stop it. And now heralds run ahead of his chariot through the streets of Egypt, shouting at an entire nation to bow. The dream was true. The dream was always true. It was true in the pit. It was true in the slave market. It was true in Potiphar's house, and it was true in the cell, and it was true on every one of the 730 mornings the butler forgot. Truth does not require your circumstances to cooperate with it. The dream was never waiting on Joseph's situation to validate it. The situation was waiting on the dream. And then 2 verses that most people skip, and they may be the most emotionally important verses in the entire chapter. And unto Joseph were born 2 sons before the years of famine came, which Asenath the daughter of Potiphar, priest of On, bare unto him. And Joseph called the name of the firstborn Manasseh. For God, said he, hath made me forget all my toil, and all my father's house. And the name of the second called he Ephraim, for God hath caused me to be fruitful in the land of my affliction. Manasseh, forgetting; Ephraim, fruitful. Look at what he is doing. He is naming his children after his healing. Every time he calls his son to dinner for the rest of his life, he is saying out loud the thing God did in him. Manasseh, come here, forgetting. Ephraim, come here, fruitful. He's building his testimony into the daily vocabulary of his household. And look at the theology in those names, because it is precise and it is hard-won, and it is not what you would expect. Manasseh, God hath made me forget all my toil and all my father's house. That is not amnesia. Joseph has not forgotten his family. He will recognize his brothers instantly, and he will weep so hard the Egyptians hear it through the walls. This is not the erasure of memory. This is the removal of its power. The memory is still there. The wound is closed. It is the difference between a scar and an open cut. Both are the record of an injury, but only one of them still bleeds when the weather changes. And notice, God hath made me forget. He does not say, I chose to move on. He does not say, I worked through it. He does not say, time healed it. God did it. Joseph could not stop the 13-year loop in his own head. God stopped it. Some of you have been trying to forgive by force of will for years, and you cannot do it, and you have concluded that you are a spiritual failure. Joseph could not either. It took God, and it took 13 years, and it took, apparently, a wife and a child, and the slow accumulation of a life on the other side of the wound. You cannot white-knuckle Manasseh. You can only receive him. And then Ephraim, God hath caused me to be fruitful in the land of my affliction, not in spite of the land of my affliction, in it. He does not say, God brought me out of the land of my affliction and made me fruitful somewhere better. Egypt is still Egypt. It is still the place they sold him to. Every street he rides down in that chariot is a street in the country of his slavery. The palace is in the same nation as the prison. He is fruitful in the land of his affliction, and he will never live anywhere else. He will die in Egypt. He will be embalmed in Egypt. Joseph never goes home. Let that land. This is not a story where the man gets his old life back. Joseph never returns to Canaan. He never gets his 20s back. He never gets an apology from Potiphar. He never sees his mother again. Rachel is long dead. Restoration in this story does not mean rewind. God did not give Joseph his life back. God gave him a different life in the land of his affliction and made it fruitful there. That is the honest promise of this book, and it is better than the one we want. We want the reversal. We want the pit undone, the years returned, the coat rewoven. That is not what is offered. What is offered is Ephraim, fruit here in this soil, in this country you never would have chosen, without leaving it. And here is the last thing about those names, and it is the thing that breaks me every time. Both of them are prophecies made too early. He names Manasseh, forgetting, before the reconciliation. He names Ephraim, fruitful, before the famine, before the brothers come, before he knows the story has a second act. He does not know when he names those boys that his father is still alive. He does not know he will ever see any of them again. As far as Joseph knows, on the day he holds his firstborn son and says the word forgetting, that chapter is simply closed forever, and this is all he gets. And he blesses it anyway. He looks at a life that is missing his father, his brothers, his homeland, and 13 stolen years, a life built in the wreckage of everything he ever wanted. And he picks up his son and names him Fruitful. That is faith. Not the faith that says God will fix it. The faith that says God has already given me something in the middle of what he did not fix, and I am going to name it out loud in front of everyone for the rest of my life. And I want you to consider doing what Joseph did, because I think it is the most practical thing in this entire study. Name something out loud. Not the wound. You already know the wound. You have named it 1,000 times in the dark. It has a name, and you use it constantly. Name the other thing. The thing that grew in the affliction. The friendship that only exists because of the worst year. The patience you did not have at 25 and somehow have now. The capacity to sit with a suffering person without flinching, without fixing, without offering a verse, because you have been where they are and you know that the verse is not what they need. That capacity cost you something enormous, and you would not have it otherwise. The prayer life that is real now, unimpressive and honest and real, that used to be a performance, that is Ephraim, that is fruit in the land of your affliction. And it does not cancel the affliction, and it does not justify it. And Joseph would be the first to tell you that he would have preferred to skip the pit. But he named the boy Fruitful anyway, and he said it out loud at every meal for the rest of his life, in the country of his slavery, and I think that is the closest thing to a spiritual discipline this story offers. Say it out loud, not because it makes it worth it, because it is true and true things ought to be said. And then the famine comes exactly as God said it would, and the famine is not only in Egypt, and the famine was over all the face of the earth. And all countries came into Egypt to Joseph to buy corn, because that the famine was so sore in all lands. And in Canaan, an old man sits in a tent and looks at his sons and says the most ordinary sentence in the world. Why do ye look one upon another? Behold, I have heard that there is corn in Egypt. Get you down thither and buy for us from thence, that we may live and not die. And 10 men who once sold their brother into Egypt for 20 pieces of silver saddle their donkeys and go down to Egypt to buy grain with silver. They are going to walk into a room, and they are going to bow with their faces to the earth, the text says. And it says it 3 separate times, because the narrator wants you to count. In front of the exact person whose dream about bowing they murdered him to prevent. And Joseph's brethren came and bowed down themselves before him with their faces to the earth. And Joseph saw his brethren, and he knew them, but made himself strange unto them. And Joseph remembered the dreams which he dreamed of them. He remembered the dreams. 22 years. 22 years since a boy stood in a tent and told these men that their sheaves would bow to his, and they hated him for it. And they threw him in a hole to find out what would become of his dreams. And now he is standing at the top of a room in Egypt, watching them press their faces into the floor in front of him. And the sheaves are bowing, and they have no idea. They do not recognize him. Of course they do not. They are looking for a dead 17-year-old Hebrew shepherd, and they are seeing a clean-shaven Egyptian governor in linen and gold who speaks to them through an interpreter. He knows them. They do not know him. That is the whole scene, and it is unbearable, and everything that happens next depends on it. Now, What happens next is the part that gets people uncomfortable, and I think it gets misread constantly. So let us go slowly. Joseph does not reveal himself, not for 2 more chapters. Instead, he accuses them of being spies. He interrogates them. He imprisons them for 3 days. He demands they bring Benjamin. He keeps Simeon in chains as collateral. He puts their silver back in their sacks to terrify them. He plants a cup in Benjamin's bag and threatens to enslave the one son their father cannot lose. And people read this and say, "Revenge." He is toying with them. He is making them suffer. It is petty and it is human, and who could blame him? I want to argue that this is exactly wrong, and that the text tells us so repeatedly in the only way it can, by telling us what he does when he leaves the room. And he turned himself about from them and wept. And he sought where to weep, and he entered into his chamber and wept there. And he washed his face and went out and refrained himself. And he wept aloud, and the Egyptians and the house of Pharaoh heard. 3 times. 3 times in this sequence, Joseph has to leave the room because he cannot hold his face together. A man does not weep himself sick in a private chamber and then wash his face and go back out to continue a revenge scheme. That is not what revenge looks like. Revenge is cold. Revenge does not need to hide in a closet to sob. So what is he doing? He is doing the hardest thing in this entire story. Harder than the pit, harder than the prison. He's finding out whether they have changed. Because think about what he is looking at. He's looking at the men who put ropes on him, and he now has, for the first time in 22 years, absolute power over them. He could have them executed in an afternoon. He could enslave them. He could send them home empty and let them starve, and it would be legal, and it would be just, and no one in Egypt would blink. And he has a father he has not seen in 22 years, and a younger brother, Benjamin, Rachel's other son, the only full brother he has, who was a small child when he left. And here is the question that is tearing him apart in that chamber. Are they the same men? Because if they are the same men, then Benjamin is in danger. If they sold one favorite son for silver, and the old man has now transparently transferred all that favoritism onto the last surviving son of Rachel, and he has, that is exactly what has happened, then Benjamin is walking the same road Joseph walked, and it is only a matter of time. Joseph is not designing a punishment. He is designing a test, and the test is exquisite because it is a perfect reconstruction of the original crime. Watch. He engineers a scenario in which the brothers have a choice. They can walk away free back to Canaan with grain and silver and their lives. And all they have to do is leave Rachel's favorite son behind in Egypt as a slave. Abandon the favored younger brother to slavery in Egypt and go home to their father and explain it however they like. That is not a random test. That is the exact same decision, in the exact same currency, with the exact same victim profile 22 years later. Joseph has rebuilt the pit and put them back in front of it to see what they will do this time. And that is why he cannot simply forgive them at the door. Not because he is withholding, but because forgiveness and reconciliation are not the same thing. And anyone who has confused the two has been hurt by the confusion. Forgiveness is what Joseph does alone in the chamber, weeping. It is between him and God, and it does not require them at all. Reconciliation requires 2 parties. Reconciliation requires knowing whether the person who hurt you is still the person who hurt you. And Joseph, who has power, who has every option, who could crush them or embrace them, takes the harder third road. He finds out. This matters enormously for some of you. And I want to say it plainly. You have been told that if you have forgiven someone, you must restore them to their former place in your life, immediately and without condition, and that any hesitation is bitterness. That is not in this book. Joseph forgave them in the chamber and tested them in the throne room, and both of those were love. It is not unforgiveness to find out whether someone has changed. It is wisdom. And in Joseph's case, it was the only thing standing between Benjamin and a caravan. So watch what the test surfaces. The first thing that comes out of them before Joseph has accused them of anything but spying is this, spoken to each other in Hebrew, in front of a man they believe cannot understand a word. And they said one to another, "We are verily guilty concerning our brother, in that we saw the anguish of his soul, when he besought us, and we would not hear. Therefore is this distress come upon us." 22 years, and the very first thing that surfaces under pressure is Joseph. Not the accusation of spying, not the strangeness of the Egyptian. Joseph. It has been sitting in them the entire time, every day, for 2 decades, the sound of a boy begging from the bottom of a cistern while they passed the bread. They never forgot, not for one day. That is what guilt does. It does not fade, it waits. And the moment the pressure comes, 22 years later in a foreign country, it comes up whole and intact and word for word, complete with the detail they had never said out loud to anyone. We saw the anguish of his soul, and we would not hear. And Reuben, poor Reuben, still the man of the too late conscience, says exactly what you would expect him to say. "Spake I not unto you, saying, Do not sin against the child, and ye would not hear? Even now, even here, I told you so. I was against it." Reuben is still, 22 years later, defending his own record. And Joseph, standing there, understanding every syllable, hears all of it. And he turned himself about from them and wept. Now come to the second journey, and to Judah, because this whole story, which looks like it is about Joseph, turns out to have a second protagonist, and his name is Judah. Judah is the one who said, "What profit is it if we slay our brother?" Judah is the one who priced him. Judah invented the transaction, and Jacob will not let Benjamin go, and the famine grinds on, and the food runs out, and finally Judah stands up in front of his father and says something that Reuben could never have said. Reuben had already tried, and what he offered was grotesque. "Slay my 2 sons if I bring him not to thee." That is Reuben all over, an offer that is dramatic, useless, and costs him nothing that he values as much as his own standing. Jacob does not even answer him. And Judah said, "Send the lad with me, and we will arise and go, that we may live and not die, both we and thou, and also our little ones. I will be surety for him. Of my hand shalt thou require him. If I bring him not unto thee, and set him before thee, then let me bear the blame forever. I will be surety for him. Put it on me." And then the trap springs. The cup is found in Benjamin's sack, planted there, of course, by the man who is watching. And the Egyptian governor announces the sentence, and the sentence is perfectly designed. "The man in whose hand the cup is found, he shall be my servant. And as for you, get you up in peace unto your father." There it is. That is the offer. Go home in peace. Leave the boy. Just walk away. It is the pit, exactly. It is 22 years ago, offered again, gift-wrapped, with a legal justification and no personal risk. They could take it. There is nothing they could have done. The cup was in his sack. The law is the law. The governor is being generous, letting the rest of them go. They could ride home to Canaan and tell Jacob that Benjamin was caught stealing, and there was nothing anyone could do, and it would even be true. And what do? Then they rent their clothes, and laded every man his ass, and returned to the city. They all go back, every one of them. They tear their clothes, the same phrase used of Jacob's grief and Reuben's panic. And they turn around and go back into the city to stand beside a brother they could have abandoned. And then Judah speaks. And what follows is the longest speech in the book of Genesis. And I think it is the most beautiful thing any human being says in the entire Old Testament. He recounts everything: the father, the old man, the boy, the brother that is dead. And then he arrives at it. "Now therefore, when I come to thy servant my father, and the lad be not with us," seeing that his life is bound up in the lad's life. it shall come to pass, when he seeth that the lad is not with us, that he will die, and thy servant shall bring down the grey hairs of thy servant our father with sorrow to the grave. He knows. Judah knows exactly what it did to Jacob the first time. He watched it. He watched his father refuse to be comforted for 22 years. He watched the old man's back break in real time, and he has spent every one of those years knowing he caused it and saying nothing, and he cannot do it twice. He cannot walk into that tent again with another story about another lost son of Rachel. And then, now therefore I pray thee, let thy servant abide instead of the lad a bondman to my lord, and let the lad go up with his brethren. For how shall I go up to my father, and the lad be not with me, lest peradventure I see the evil that shall come on my father? Let me stay, take me instead. Let him go. Stop. Stop right here, because this is it. This is the hinge of the entire story, and Joseph is standing 4 feet away listening to it. The man who sold a favored son of Rachel into Egyptian slavery for silver is now offering to become an Egyptian slave himself for nothing, so that a favored son of Rachel can go free. The exact same man, the exact same crime, offered back to him in reverse, and he takes the slavery. That is repentance, not the word, the thing itself, not an apology, not an emotion, not I feel terrible about what I did. Repentance is standing in front of the identical choice you failed the first time and choosing differently at your own expense. Judah does not know Joseph is alive. Judah does not know he is being tested. Judah does not know there is any reward for this at all. He thinks he is genuinely, permanently trading his freedom for his brother's forever, and he does it. 22 years of guilt did something to Judah. It did not just torture him, it rebuilt him. And that is why the scepter goes to Judah, not to Joseph. When Jacob blesses his sons in chapter 49, the kingdom does not go to the golden boy. Judah, thou art he whom thy brethren shall praise. The scepter shall not depart from Judah, the tribe of kings, the line of David. And 1,000 years after that, a descendant of Judah will stand in front of a father with a cup he does not want, and say, in effect, exactly what his ancestor said in that Egyptian throne room: "Let the lad go, and take me instead." The Lion of the tribe of Judah. It starts here. It starts with a man who sold his brother, learning over 22 years of unbearable guilt how to offer himself in his brother's place. God did not just save Joseph in this story. God saved Judah. And he did it the long way, through the whole ruinous mess of the crime and the guilt and the shame of Tamar, and 2 decades of silence. And he built a king out of a slave trader. Do not ever tell me God cannot use your worst thing. And then Joseph breaks. Then Joseph could not refrain himself before all them that stood by him, and he cried, "Cause every man to go out from me." And there stood no man with him, while Joseph made himself known unto his brethren. And he wept aloud, and the Egyptians and the house of Pharaoh heard. He clears the room. The second most powerful man in the world orders every guard, every scribe, every attendant out, because what is about to happen is not for Egypt. And then 22 years of it come out of him at once, and he weeps so loudly that the sound travels through the palace, out into the corridors, all the way to Pharaoh's house. And Joseph said unto his brethren, I'm Joseph, doth my father yet live? I am Joseph, the name they would not say, the name they replaced with thy son, when they handed his coat to their father, the name the butler could not be bothered to remember. He says it himself in Hebrew in his own voice, to the 10 men who have not heard him speak since he was screaming from the bottom of a hole. And his brethren could not answer him, for they were troubled at his presence. Of course they could not. What is there to say? The dead man is alive, and he is the governor of Egypt, and he has had absolute power over them for the entire time they have been in this country, and they have been bowing to him for weeks, and every single word of the dream they killed him to disprove has come true in front of them. And Joseph said unto his brethren, Come near to me, I pray you. And they came near. Come near to me. 22 years ago they came near to him and took his coat and threw him in a pit. Now with all the power in the world, he says it again. Come near. And this time it means the opposite. I am Joseph your brother, whom ye sold into Egypt. He says it. He does not skip it. He does not paper over it with, it's all in the past, whom ye sold into Egypt. The truth is spoken out loud in the room by the victim to the perpetrator's faces. That is not bitterness. That is the necessary precondition of everything that follows. You cannot forgive what you will not name. Reconciliation that requires the lie to be maintained is not reconciliation. It is just the lie with better manners. He names it. And then he does the impossible thing. Now therefore be not grieved nor angry with yourselves that ye sold me hither. For God did send me before you to preserve life. God did send me before you to preserve life. And here we have to be very careful, because this sentence has been weaponized against suffering people for 2,000 years, and I refuse to do that to you. Joseph is not saying the sale was good. He's not saying it did not matter. He is not saying God wanted them to do it, or that they were puppets executing a script, or that their guilt is void because it produced a good outcome. He will say, 5 verses into chapter 50, and to their faces, ye thought evil against me. That verdict is never withdrawn. The evil stays evil in this book from beginning to end. What Joseph is saying is something far stranger and far more load-bearing than everything happens for a reason. He is saying that there were 2 agencies at work in the same event, and they were not the same agency, and they did not want the same thing, and only one of them got what it wanted. Ye thought evil against me, but God meant it unto good. The Hebrew verb is the same for both clauses. Chashab. To devise, to plan, to weave, to reckon, you wove evil. God wove good. Same event, same thread. 2 weavers. That is not fatalism. Fatalism says it was all supposed to happen. It says the pit was fine actually because look at the outcome. That is a lie, and it is a cruel lie, and it is not what Joseph says. Joseph says, what you did to me was evil, and it was your evil, and you own it, and God, without authoring it, without needing it, without approving of it for 1 second, took the very thing you built to destroy me and used it as the mechanism of your own salvation. You built a weapon. God took it out of your hand and built a granary with it. And I want to name what this does not promise, because I am not willing to sell you something the text does not contain. It does not promise that you will get to see it. Joseph got to see it. That is not a rule, that is a mercy, and it is a mercy not everyone in Scripture receives. Abel never saw it. Uriah never saw it. The mothers of Bethlehem never saw it. Hebrews 11 runs through the roll call of the faithful and then says, flatly, of a whole company of them, these all died in faith, not having received the promises. They saw them afar off. Some of you are in that company. Some of you are going to die without the explanation, and the Bible knows it, and it does not lie to you about it. It does not promise the good will be proportionate to the evil in any way you can measure. Joseph saved a nation. Your 13 years may buy something you consider far smaller. 1 person, 1 child, 1 moment of being able to sit with someone in a hospital room and say, I know, because you actually do know, because you were there. God does not publish the exchange rate, and it does not promise a timeline. 13 years to the throne, 22 years to the room. Joseph was 39 years old before 1 word of explanation existed for anything that had happened to him since he was 17. 22 years is not a season. It is most of a life. What it promises is this, and only this, and it is enough. There is no material so ruined that God cannot build with it. Not your worst year, not the thing that was done to you, not the thing you did. There is not a pit deep enough, a lie effective enough, or a forgetting long enough to put you outside the reach of a God who has been, this entire time, weaving on the other side of the same thread. And notice, This is important. Joseph never says God meant it unto good until chapter 45 at the earliest, 22 years in. He could not have said it at 17. He could not have said it in Potiphar's house. He absolutely could not have said it on morning 600 in that cell. If you had climbed down into the pit at Dothan and said to that bleeding boy, God means this for good, you would have deserved whatever he said back to you. So do not say it to people in the pit. Please, do not do that. This sentence is not a tool for managing other people's grief, and it is not something you hand across a hospital bed. This sentence belongs to the sufferer. It is Joseph's to say, and it is yours to say, about your own life, when and if you ever can. It is a confession, not an explanation. In someone else's mouth aimed at your pain, it is a bludgeon. In your own mouth, about your own wreckage, it is a resurrection. What do you say to people in the pit then? You say the thing the narrator says. You do not say why, you say with. You go down into the pit and you sit in it with them, and you shut your mouth, and you are, for that person, in that hour, the presence of God, because that is the only answer heaven ever actually gave Joseph. And it turned out to be enough, and it turned out to be everything. Now let me bring this home, because there are things in this story I do not want you to leave without. The first is this: Joseph's suffering was not punishment. Say it to yourself if you need to. There is no verse in which God is disciplining Joseph. He was not paying for the arrogance of chapter 37. The brothers sinned. Potiphar's wife sinned. Potiphar was a coward. The butler was selfish. Human beings did this to him freely, and they are accountable for it, and God did not need any of it. Stop hunting through your history for the transgression that explains your catastrophe. That is not what this book teaches. Sometimes the pit is just evil done by people, and the only thing God says about it is, I am here. The second is this: God's presence is not God's protection, and you have to make peace with that, or your faith will not survive contact with your life. The Lord was with Joseph in the slave quarters. The Lord was with Joseph in the cell. Emmanuel, God with us, was not born into a palace and did not grow up safe, and he ended on a Roman cross crying out that he had been forsaken, and he was not lying about how it felt. The presence of God is not a promise that nothing will hurt you. It is a promise that nothing will happen to you alone. That is a smaller promise than the one we wanted, and a far bigger one than we understood. The third is this: the delay is not the enemy of the dream. The delay is the making of the dreamer. 13 years between the promise and the throne, and every one of them was doing something in Joseph that could not have been done any faster. God is not slow. God is thorough, and a God who was willing to be prompt would have handed absolute power to a boy who would have been destroyed by it, and he loved him too much to be on time. The fourth is this: the door that will not open may be held. 2 full years of a butler's silence, which felt like abandonment, and was in fact the most precise act of protection in the entire narrative. You cannot tell the difference from inside. That is the whole of it. That is what faith is. The willingness to keep building in Potiphar's house without knowing which kind of silence you are living in. And the fifth is this, and this is the one I want to leave in your hands. Nothing was wasted. Not the pit, which taught him what powerlessness feels like from the inside, which is the only education that produces mercy. Not Potiphar's house, which taught him Egyptian administration, which is the only skill that saved the world. Not the prison, which put him next to the one man on earth who would eventually, 2 years late, say his name in front of a king. Not the forgetting, which held him in position until the exact morning. Every wasted year turned out to be load-bearing. He could not see it, Not one day of it. He lived every one of those days believing they were meaningless, and they were building a throne. So here is what I want to say to you, wherever you are as you listen to this. If you are in the pit, the acute thing, the fresh horror, the ropes still on your wrists, I am not going to tell you God meant it for good. It is not mine to say, and it is not time. What I will tell you is that the narrator is writing. There is a sentence being written over your life right now that you cannot hear, and it says, "The Lord is with him, the Lord is with her," and it is being written in the exact verse where everything fell apart. If you are in Potiphar's house, doing the invisible work faithfully, in a situation you did not choose and cannot leave, with no evidence it matters, keep the accounts well. Potiphar is watching. He does not know he is watching. And the God of Abraham is blessing a house you never wanted to be in, for your sake. And one day, someone in that house is going to say, as a pagan Egyptian once said about a trafficked teenager, "There is something of God in this person." You will probably not hear them say it. If you are in the cell on morning 600, if you have watched hope walk out the door and forget your name, and you have stopped saying maybe today because it costs too much, then hear this. The 2 full years were the mercy. I know how that sounds. I know it does not feel like mercy. Joseph did not feel it either. He felt forgotten because he was, by everyone who had a mouth and a memory. And a hand was on that door the entire time, holding it shut until a king 2 miles away had a dream about cows. And if you are Judah, if you are not the victim in your story but the one who did it, if you have been carrying 22 years of something you have never said out loud, and you have read this whole thing quietly, identifying with the wrong brother and hoping nobody noticed, then hear this, and hear it last, because it may be the most important thing here. God built a king out of the man who set the price. The scepter went to the brother who sold him, not to the innocent one, to the guilty one who, decades later, when the identical choice came back around, finally said, "Take me instead." Your guilt is not the end of your story. It is, in the hands of this God, the raw material of the only kind of person who ever learns to lay their life down for somebody else. There is no one in this book too far gone. There was not one in the room, and there is not one listening now. The story ends, by the way, with Joseph old in Egypt, still in the land of his affliction, having never gone home. And his last recorded words are these, "I die, and God will surely visit you, and bring you out of this land unto the land which he sware to Abraham." And he makes them swear to carry his bones out when they go. He never saw the promised land. He died in Egypt, fruitful in the land of his affliction, holding on to a promise whose fulfillment was 400 years past his own funeral. And 400 years later, on the night Israel walked out of Egypt with the sea about to open in front of them, in the middle of the greatest deliverance in the Old Testament, with an entire nation running for its life, someone stopped and went and got a box of bones and carried them out. And Moses took the bones of Joseph with him. He got home. It took 4 centuries and he was not conscious for it. But the promise did not expire, and God did not forget the coordinates of one man's grave in the middle of delivering a nation. He will not forget yours either. Before you go, I want to ask you to do one thing. Somewhere in the last few hours, a person came into your mind. I would be surprised if they did not. Maybe it was at the pit, maybe at Potiphar's house, maybe at the 2 full years, but somewhere in this, a face arrived and you thought, this is them. This is what they are living in right now. This is the exact weight they have been carrying and cannot put down and cannot explain to anybody. Send them this video. That is my only real ask. Not for me, for them. You know who they are. The friend on morning 600 who has stopped saying maybe today. The brother who has been faithful in a house nobody sees. The one who did the right thing and got punished for it, and has been quietly wondering ever since whether God was ever there at all. Send it. It costs you nothing but the 10 seconds it takes to press share and type their name. And it might be the thing that reaches them at exactly the hour they needed it, from a direction they never expected, which, if you have been listening at all, you will recognize as precisely how God tends to work. Be the man in the field. Give the directions. You will probably never know what it was the hinge of, and if you would, one small thing after that. Subscribe if you have not. It is free and it is one tap, and it simply means you will be here for what comes next, and there is a great deal coming. And then tell me in the comments where you are and what time it is where you are right now. Just that. The city and the hour. Because I want you to scroll through and see it. Someone reading this at 2 in the morning in Manila. Someone at lunch in Lagos. Someone in the dark in Ohio at 4 a.m. because sleep would not come. Someone on a train in Manchester. All of us in different hours, in different pits, hearing the same words at once. You are not doing this alone. You have never been doing this alone. That is, in fact, the entire point of everything you have just heard. And now, hear this over you. May the God who was with Joseph in the pit be with you in yours. May he be with you in the house you did not choose, and the cell you did not deserve, and the years you cannot account for. May he hold shut every door that would ruin you and open in one morning the one you never thought to knock on. May he make you fruitful in the land of your affliction, not somewhere else, not someday, but there, in that soil, in that country you never wanted. May he take every hand that was raised against you, and every year that was stolen from you, and every silence you could not interpret, and may he weave them into something that saves lives you have not met yet. And when you cannot hear him, and there will be days, and they may be years, may you remember that the narrator is still writing, and that the sentence over your life tonight in this exact chapter is the one he has been writing all along. The Lord is with you. God bless you. Go in his peace. Your bones will make it home.